The Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 21st chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
When some were speaking about the temple, how it was adorned with beautiful stones and gifts dedicated to God, Jesus said, "As for these things that you see, the days will come when not one stone will be left upon another. All will be thrown down." They asked him, "Teacher, when will this be, and what will be the sign that this is about to take place?" And he said, "Beware that you are not led astray, for many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and the time is near. Do not go after them. When you hear of wars and insurrections, do not be terrified, for these things must take place first, but the end will not follow immediately." Then he said to them, "Nations will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, and in various places famines and plagues, and there will be dreadful portents and great signs from heaven. But before all this occurs, they will arrest you and persecute you. They will hand you over to synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before kings and governors because of my name. This will give you an opportunity to testify. So make up your minds not to prepare your defense in advance, for I will give you words and a wisdom that none of your opponents will be able to withstand or contradict. You will be betrayed even by parents and brothers, by relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. You will be hated by all because of my name, but not a hair of your head will perish. By your endurance, you will gain your souls." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
What an unpredictable world we live in, right? In case you slept through it, we've had an interesting week. It started, I think, with the end of daylight savings time last Sunday, which isn't necessarily unpredictable because we know it's coming, and you can hopefully fit that extra hour of sleep in one way or another. But with that time change comes the unpredictability of how children and animals and anyone who can't read a clock is going to respond. And if you're outside trying to do some work and you realize that you have forgotten that the time has changed, like I did, you realize it when it's pitch black out at 5:30 in the afternoon and you haven't put anything away. But then in the midst of this change, we're stuck with all kinds of other news. Friends and families facing broken relationships, changes in health that can happen in the blink of an eye, surgeries and procedures that can bring healing or it can bring more bad news. And of course, the unpredictability of campaigns and elections that change and shape us in ways that we don't know. There are a lot of things, especially after this week, that we do not agree on. I'm guessing, though, that we can agree on this one thing, that life is uncertain. Life can change in the blink of an eye, even when we think we're on solid ground. We heard that as part of the story in today's gospel lesson. People were standing around this amazing temple in Jerusalem, just talking about how great it was. Like, look at that temple. Look how amazing this thing is. Big, beautiful stones. And those decorations, look at these decorations. It must have cost a fortune, but nothing is too much for God. No, this temple is obviously blessed for God and blessed by God. And this temple must have been spectacular. I bet it looked overwhelming. It looked powerful and indestructible. But then what does Jesus say when he hears everyone raving about this? As for these things that you see, the days will come when not one stone will be left upon another. All will be thrown down. Talk about unsettling. But I guess all these people trusted Jesus enough to believe that these words of his were true. They didn't question it. They didn't make any accusations that this was an empty prediction. He didn't know what he was talking about. But because we don't like uncertainty, they needed to know more. Teacher, when will this be? And what will be the sign that this is to take place? This sounds too unpredictable. For something this big, we need certainty on the who, what, when, where, why, the how. But does that certainty come? Not really. Instead, they hear about all these other catastrophes that are going to occur. Wars, insurrections, earthquakes, famines, plagues, dreadful portions, great signs, just to name a few. And if that didn't raise the anxiety enough, then Jesus talks about those things that will happen to the actual hearers. Arrests, persecutions, judgment, betrayal, hatred, death. Comforting, right? So I guess the only certainty in life isn't just death and taxes. It's also uncertainty. What's going on here? The story is one of the last stories we get in Luke's gospel before we begin Jesus' passion. These are some of Jesus' last words to his followers before he begins that journey to his suffering and his death. So this story is supposed to bring comfort to those hearers. Did that sound comforting? But really, there was comfort in the midst of all that. It was pretty easy to miss. I missed it a few times. But one of those lines I heard was, when you hear about wars and insurrections, do not be terrified. Maybe we should say it again. When you hear about wars and insurrections, when you hear about terror and hatred, when you hear about crime and killings, when you hear about the messes of this world in which we live, do not be terrified. Easier said than done, Jesus. But let's hang on to those words for just a minute, because Jesus goes on to describe more of what's going on around him. And this time things get personal. He starts telling them that you might get arrested. You might be persecuted. You might be handed over to those in power. You might be brought into courts and in front of authority figures, all because of Jesus. Thanks a lot, Jesus. But what does he say? This will give you an opportunity to testify. This will give you an opportunity to tell the story to everyone about the good news that comes through me. Now, many of you are probably thinking that having to testify about your faith and about Jesus is worse than being arrested and persecuted and judged and imprisoned. I mean, I wouldn't know what to say. I don't know the Bible well enough. I can't articulate the things I feel. I just feel them. But Jesus is a mind reader. He's heard you think and say all of these things because what does he say next? I will give you the words and a wisdom that none of your opponents will be able to withstand or contradict. We don't have to worry about knowing. We don't have to worry about thinking that we'll sound unintelligent or stupid. I mean, those words will be given to us. Those words are already in us. It's part of who we are as children of God. I mean, we can tell the world what God has done. So don't be terrified. These words of Jesus have been more helpful to me lately if I think of them as less of a timeline, but rather more in, a general sense, if you want to say it like that. Instead of thinking of it as a timeline or something linear, instead of hearing Jesus say that this, and this will happen, and then when that has happened, then I'm going to show up. Maybe it's more helpful to think of it in terms of Jesus saying that all of these things can and will happen, but still do not be terrified, because I will be with you in the midst of it all, giving you the words and a testimony, and I will be there in the end. And you can know that not a hair of your head will perish because of any of it. So I should probably retract my earlier statement that the only certainties in life are not just death and taxes, it's uncertainty as well. But really, the only certainty in life is the certainty of Jesus' presence in the midst of this world, in the midst of our humanness, in the midst of health problems, in the midst of our government and political institutions, in the midst of hardship and suffering, in the midst of death and the end. The certainty that Jesus was born to walk this earth, born to suffer and die, and born to rise again. The certainty is that Jesus Christ is the one who conquered death so that we have nothing to fear. Do not be terrified. So at the end of this week, for many reasons, we may be especially weary. And at the end of an election cycle, we may be quite tired of hearing promises made by all sorts of candidates that may or may not come true. But our true hope, both this week and every week, is that we can be strong in the faith and the certainty that the promises Jesus has made to us will come true. Promises that we are loved, called and claimed as children of God, and promises that we are sent into the world to share God's love and tell of what God has done for us, and yet through it all, the promise that God will be present with us so that we do not need to be terrified. Thanks be to God. Amen.